Hello there and welcome. In this video, I have another Angular topic which is Angular data binding. So it is a beginner level topic, but I would say it doesn't matter what level you are in your expertise of your Angular knowledge, maybe beginner, intermediate, or pro level. I would say if you don't know what are different types of binding, you may not write your UI code very efficiently. So that's why it's really, I feel that it's absolutely necessary that you know what are different types of bindings so that you can apply it in the cases where it is required rather than writing a very junky code in your project. As we know that we have many UI elements like we have input boxes, we have check boxes, we have select list buttons, radio buttons, sliders, and all other stuff. So we need to always have some binding between those UI elements and our source or our component in which we will be performing some operations based on the events happening on the HTML page. So there the data binding comes very handy. It is been made very easy in the Angular framework to use of the binding. We can access data very easily at any point. So in Angular, uh, at the top level, we have two types of binding. First is one-way binding and second is a two-way binding. In the one-way binding, we pass data in only one direction, while in the two-way binding, it is feasible that you can pass data in the both direction. Now, how this direction are decides? The directions are based on your data is flowing from whether from your data source to the view or from your view to data source back. So based on that, we decide the direction. So in the one-way data binding where I want to send data from my component or service, basically I'm terming that as a data source. It is safe to call a data source and not to use a directory or the component words here. From data source to view, if I'm passing that, I have options like I can use a string interpolation. String interpolation is a very simple one. As you can see, I have already implemented that many a times in the previous videos. If you see, I have one operator in my HTML file where I'm using a double curly braces. This is the string interpolation. Attribute binding where we bind the data based on one attribute which is there in the element. So to understand it better, I will take you to the Angular documentation, and from there I am on the Angular documentation on the document page, and I have navigated to bindings, and the examples of bindings included here are the text interpolation as I just showed using the double curly brackets, then the property binding, and then event binding and the two-way binding. In the attribute binding, we specify the attributes that are associated with the HTML tag. Like in this example, I have a paragraph tag, and if I want to set some attribute, I can put any custom attribute that I want. It doesn't matter, and then I can provide the expression. Expression may be deriving the value what I want to assign it. Maybe some depending on some condition I want to return true or false, or maybe depending on condition I want to return any type of data. It can be a string, number, boolean, doesn't matter. In this example, there is a tr and td tag, and this is a cell in the table, and to decide the call span of that cell, the value provided through attribute properties 1 plus 1. So I can write a code in this way also. Now coming to a next type of binding, which is class and style binding. So here it is the characteristics of the class and the style type of binding that if I need to specify it, I have to use the syntax like this. I need to put it in the square brackets. So for this example, class.cell on cell. So here I'm deciding that if my on cell variable, which is a boolean type, if it is true or false, then only I will have the class cell attached to my element. It doesn't need to be a boolean, actually it is a truthy or falsy. So I recommend you to watch what are the truthy and falsy values in the JavaScript. That will give you a more idea on what returns a true and false ultimately. Angular tells that we can also bind multiple classes as it is shown in this table. Single class can be easily binded using this way. You use a truthy value to assign or not. Then I can put the expression. The expression can be a simple string where the single class is there in the string, or it can be a multiple strings separated by the space, and which represents the multiple classes. Multi-class binding where we just put a simple array, and in that array we have the list of classes that we need to bind. Then another type is a style type of binding where we simply put the style of the CSS that we want to apply on this element. Like in this case, for the nav bar, background color has been set depending on the expression. So as I also said this before, expression, we can put whatever we want. It needs to be valid TypeScript expression, and it also can be a simple value. Like if I want to specify the hex code of the color, I can do that, or the RGB value, I can do that. Coming to the next type of binding, which is event binding. In the event binding, we pass the data from the view to the component or to the data source, and there we need to use the event handlers and the event methods. So as you can see in this example, and we already did this in previous tutorials, if I have any button that I want to, like here I have add new hero button, and I have a click event, and depending on what I do there, I am passing the add new hero. I'm passing a control to add new hero method, which is implemented below. So the first part click is called a target event name, and the second part is a template statement. The statement that I have, it can be just expression. I don't need to invoke any method. I can, if there is some simple code, I can put that. And here it is an function name that will be called. We can also bind keyboard events. So there is a list of events that are available to us. So common events like key down, if we are pressing the shift key or the combination of the keys, or the common keys like shift alt command if you are using Mac. So those keys we can so the event of those keys we can monitor by using a event binding in this way. So through property binding, we can pass the data, and there is a constraint with the property binding that we need to specify that in the square brackets, and then we can assign value to that property. So I again will come back to my VS Code and will show you, like in this case, to pass data from my parent component to a child component, I have used this property binding. The syntax, as you can see, it is in the square brackets, and I'm assigning a variable to it. I can also assign simply value to it. If it is of the type string, I can do that also. Or if you want to put some expression, you can put a valid expression there. There are some properties that are default provided by Angular, so you can know those from the Angular documentation, like one I have here, which is disable. Here, if you want to put a button as disabled depending on some truthy or falsy value, you can use the disabled property here. Then comes a two-way binding. So for the two-way binding, we have ng model. Ng model is a part of the forms module. Two-way binding is a great way if you are not sure that your data is going to flow from which direction. So you can use ng model. So with the ng model, as you can see here, you can assign a values to your HTML tag, HTML element, and you can also uh, get back those value from your HTML elements into your data source. One more type of a binding I want to show, which is the use of reference variable. This was the old approach, and it was being used very heavily in the template driven form, but later on when the reactive forms concept was introduced, it lost that popularity, but it is good to know. So if I have to put a reference variable to and this input element, what I will do is I will use a syntax like ref child title here, and then I can use this ref child title in my view anywhere I want. So suppose if I want to put it after the button, so I will simply use a string interpolation and paste this. This time I don't need a hash ref child title, and I will put a value. And let me go back to my application. It's loaded, and I can see that the value that I have in my input is now also there after my button. So if I change this, I can see that it's changing.